Good evening. Welcome to the highlight of the BAC's spring lecture series, the Cascieri Lecture in the Humanities, given by distinguished ACSA professor, writer, designer, and now BAC president, Dr. Mahesh Daas. My name is Karen Nelson. I'm the Dean of the School of Architecture at the Boston Architectural College. And for those of you who are new to the college, we offer undergraduate and graduate degree programs in architecture, design studies, interior architecture, and landscape architecture. Let's see if I can do this. Share screen. For those of you interested in receiving AIA continuing education units, please email Beverly Verla at thebac.edu. We're very grateful that Benjamin Prosky at AIA New York City has agreed to co-host this lecture and share it with a wider audience. We're delighted to be a part of the larger learning community in this time. I'm just gonna move this down. This college was founded in 1889 as a place of conversation. And we continue to try to bring new energy to the discussion about design and the city. Tonight, through this lecture, we're here to celebrate the life and work of Dean Arcangelo Cascieri, pictured here, when he was a student at the BAC. We do this in part because of his volunteer work. From 1943 until 1995, Dean Cascieri challenged this community to raise questions about the role that design plays in society. The lectureship began as a 90th birthday gift to Arcangelo that he gave back to the students. The celebration took place in our main lecture hall, now named after him, just 28 years ago. I want to express my gratitude to the BAC community members who have kept this lecture alive in the life of the college, especially Bernie Goba, Don Brown, and Anthony Pina. I'm grateful for your energy and continued commitment. Each year, the BAC invites a distinguished speaker to present a public lecture on the many ways in which architecture and design interact with other disciplines and enrich our common life. This year's 28th Cascieri Lecturer in the Humanities is BAC President Mahesh Daas. I can think of no one more appropriate to the global current situation and in the life of the college to be our Cascieri Lecturer. President Mahesh Daas, as I'm sure you will soon gather, is an extraordinarily intelligent leader, humble and empathetic. He thinks actively about the role technology plays in our lives and its capacity to enrich and complicate our present and future. Tonight, Dr. Daas explores a central question: how can humans and robots live and work together? This question has special significance now and for architects and designers in order to design buildings, neighborhoods, and cities for decades to come. Based on his recent book, Towards A Robotic Architecture, President Mahesh Daas will examine robotics and its architectural implications from a phenomenological perspective. Dr. Daas is the 8th president of the Boston Architectural College. He is a designer, technologist, and an experienced academic leader. Mahesh Daas earned his bachelor's degree from Nehru Technological University in Hyderabad, India, a master's degree in urban design from Kansas State University, and an executive doctorate in higher education from the University of Pennsylvania. President Daas is an author and has been featured in scholarly journals, federal publications, and academic books. He most recently co-edited the book Towards A Robotic Architecture, which has been chosen as a top tech book of 2018 by Architects newspaper. Dr. Daas is the author of Leading with Aesthetics, the Transformational Leadership of President Charles M. Best at MIT. Throughout his career, President Daas has received several awards. In 2011, he was the youngest educator and second person of Asian origin to be elevated as an Association of Collegiate Schools of Architecture Distinguished Professor, the highest national recognition for an architectural educator. He was recognized for contributions to design computing with the 2013 Association for Computer-Aided Design and Architecture, known as ACADIA, their Society Award of Excellence. ACADIA elected Dr. Daas twice as its president, and he served on the editorial board of the International Journal of Architectural Computing and the editorial board of Construction Robotics Journal. Dr. Mahesh Daas's scholarly research investigates the emerging thinking related to robotics and architecture and how it will change and challenge our notions of what it means to be human. Please give your full attention and a warm welcome to Mahesh Daas for his Cascieri lecture entitled Being Human, Being Robot. How will we live and work together? Thank you.
Thank you, Karen, for your very kind and thoughtful introduction. Good evening, everyone. I am truly honored to be the 28th speaker in the Dean Arcangelo Cascieri Lectureship in Humanities at the Boston Architectural College. I am thrilled that the virtual Cascieri Lecture Hall could open up its wall to the world today. And thank you all for joining live this evening. My heart goes out first to all of you who are affected and to the healthcare workers on the front lines. I have been truly heartened by the speed and energy with which my colleagues at the BAC and the larger design education community has come together to provide support for our students and each other. I have full confidence that as educators and as designers, we are uniquely positioned to provide lasting solutions to various aspects of this crisis. This is one rare moment when all of us are at our homes and sharing this moment together. So thank you so much again for joining, and we are in this together. My talk today is largely based on the book Towards A Robotic Architecture that I co-edited with my partner, Andrew John Witt. This book was the first comprehensive book featuring work from many countries and many researchers all around the globe. In my presentation today, I will present the cultural and phenomenological perspective on robotics, while zooming into some specific aspects of interest to architectural and design communities. So before we talk about robots, I would like us to briefly reflect upon one aspect of being human. Being human is certainly not an entitlement, but a privilege, in my mind, to remind us to tread on this earth lightly, share the world with all living beings, and earn the right to continue to be. This is a moment when we need to move from hubris to humility, which requires one special aspect of being human: the ability to empathize with the living as well as a non-living world. Jean-Paul Sartre's Antoine de Saint-Exupéry's muse, objects should not touch because they are not alive. You use them, put them back in place. You live among them. They're useful, nothing more. But they touch me. It is unbearable. I'm afraid of being in contact with them as though they are living beasts. That is a segue to understanding robots as phenomena. We are at the dawn of a new era, one in which new life forms of our creation will walk and work among us. They will help open up unprecedented possibilities, challenge our worldviews and assumptions, and redefine the human condition, as I will try to show. Robots are captivating because I would say robots are us. Robots are about life, and more so about being human. Be it the ominous HAL 9000 in 2001 Space Odyssey, or the robot duo R2-D2 and C-3PO from Star Wars. robots have become an integral part of our popular culture and collective imagination. So let's take a moment to understand what I mean by robots. Robots are essentially physical, kinetic beings. They have a body, form, size, and other physical characteristics. They are embodied in this world, in this life world, in a very particular way. The three shared characteristics of all robots are physicality, mobility, and some level of computational intelligence. Hence, robots are often described under the rubric of embodied intelligence. Robots are depending on the level of self-sufficiency and the level of control. We can classify them in three categories: teleoperated, semi-autonomous, or fully autonomous. So in our book, we frame robotics through how they are present in the world to humans. We could look at robotics through the lens of, there are four different ways we can look at it. Robot architecture interactions, or robot people interactions, robot interactions, and robot human architecture interactions. And each of these categories presents a unique challenge to understanding and developing these interactive frameworks. Understood this way, we move into a systems approach to robotics and architecture. So this is legendary roboticist Rodney Brooks, and he once said, I, Rodney Brooks, am a robot. I'm a machine, so are you. I, you, our family, friends, and dogs, we all are machines. We are really sophisticated machines made up of billions and billions of biomolecules that interact according to a well-defined, though not completely known, rules deriving from physics and chemistry. This biomolecular interactions taking place inside our heads gives rise to our intellect, our feelings, and our sense of self, end quote. So imagine this, when clocks were invented, people began to see the world as an intricate clock. And when the Industrial Revolution rolled out, people began to see themselves as machines. We define ourselves in the image of our inventions, our creations, and vice versa. Now, robots transform how we see the world and ourselves. Just as Brooks reframes humans as robots, we could potentially frame robots as life forms with a certain level of intelligence. Robots are definitely not the other. So being a robot and being in a human in a relationship to a robot, becoming a robot, being a robot and not realizing one is a robot, and virtually all existential, ontological, psychological, and social variations of robotics narratives have been fully addressed in the fictional as well as scholarly discourses, about literature and fiction. Here, what I would like to do is I would like us to see the possibility of robots as a new form of life, and therefore I call it VICTUS robotus. So let me offer another framework here. And this is a very important one, in my mind, probably the most important one in understanding robotics and robots. So it is robots by form. So there are four categories that we offer, and one is biomorphic, mechanomorphic, polymorphic, or amorphic, based on the level of autonomy and form. Biomorphic means robots that look and mimic living beings, animal world, plant world. Mechanomorphic is where the robots look like what we consider machines. And polymorphic is where they can take on different forms, like transformers. And amorphic means there's no particular form. It's like a HAL 9000 robot ship. So now let's take a look at a few of these various kinds of forms. In this case, the floor mopping robot from iRobot, here is where we ask how we clean together. And in this case, how we sanitize together, which takes on a new meaning in today's crisis. Or in this case, the Alice E project explored how young people would respond to small social robots. Some social robots have come to play a role in working with children with special needs as well. And in this case, how we care together and how we socialize together. The robot pictured here is called Alfie. It's a social robot designed to provide assistance to elderly. It can video chat, remind our companions, their companions, to take timely medicines and find misplaced objects around the house. In this case, a recognizable form, it is an automobile form. Autonomous vehicles are really robots that we can sit in and go around and drive, or be driven in this case. And they are still some distance away, no pun intended, but they have made significant advances and still hold the prospect of transforming how we move about the cities and the world. In this case, the drones, here I show a jet-powered drone because there are different ways the drones can fly around. But something that the drones do, one thing is that they offer a perspective, a way of seeing. And I'm kind of reminded of Le Corbusier's description of how airplanes change the worldview and perspective on how we see the cities, how we see the work of architects and designers. In this case, the drones are offering us different ways of seeing and sensing and describing the world. So in this particular instance, these are submersible robots. And these robots can glide around in the water and remote areas, remote parts of the oceans, and be able to sense what is happening to the ocean health, be it temperature or a variety of other characteristics, and offer us a new way of understanding the planet, a new way of sensing the planet, and really understanding the health of the planet. So how we remote sense together, that is a new possibility opened up by robots. And how we shop together. This is a cargo robot called Gita. It's invented by Piaggio. And this particular robot essentially carries stuff, whatever stuff you would like, and it can follow you around. And an earlier version that they made could actually be a self-driving cargo robot that can go around, and you can actually describe a certain pathway and it could follow that. And so this could potentially offer new ways of moving things around, particularly delivery of various products. So Amazon or other companies are looking to these kinds of solutions. And of course, this is a familiar sight to all of us. Why? Because the assembly lines all over the world have been converted into robotic manufacturing tracks. And in this case, how we produce together has become an important part of how we make things and how we are able to deliver things. So this is a Tesla factory, a snap of that, with industrial robots assembling. And robotic surgery has led to very precise and less error-prone procedures that can allow for speedier recovery and healing. So pictured here is a Da Vinci robot. And you might be surprised to see Nest thermostat here. Now, Nest is actually a robotic agency that transforms your heating, ventilation, air conditioning systems into robotic systems. And because this is an intelligent system, and when you plug that in, your house, this at a systems level, becomes a robotic system. So this is how we weather together. Now, how we explore together is changing too because of robotics. So Mars is currently the only planet in the solar system, and perhaps anywhere else in the universe that we know, entirely inhabited only by robots. So this is a planet of robots. Moving on to Sophia. Sophia robot, I would describe Sophia as a political robot. She could display about 60 different facial expressions and made a great debut in 2017 and earned citizenship of Saudi Arabia and a few other countries as well. And it was one of the more interesting portrayals of how the gendered humanoid form allowed for the role robots could play in politics and human rights. Now, let me offer a framework that is more pertinent to architecture, because a large number of the audience have the architectural design background. And so I offer this to understand what role robots play in the architectural design and production process. So there are 4 ways they can play a role. One is design robots, fabrication robots, construction robots on site, or operation robots where they could operate the facilities in buildings. So there are 4 different ways, and these are the categories in which there's some work going on or a lot of work going on. So that is another way to access and wrap our mind around robotics and architecture and design. So in that context, let me do a deep dive into how we make together, partly because this is a topic of interest to a lot of architects and designers, and there are different ways this technology reveals how we can interact with the world, with the material, and how we can create the world in new ways. So let me offer first, before I jump into it, let me offer a perspective. Because digital fabrication was certainly the last 2 decades, we heard a lot about digital fabrication. The use of advanced manufacturing technologies like CNC mills, 3D printers, laser cutters. It was and has been typically framed in very servile or instrumentalist, formalist, and functionalist terms. In such a context, there is a marked difference between technologies of making and the artifacts that are made with those technologies. So the artifacts that are made with the technologies, we describe them in an extraordinarily poetic way, but the machines that make them, certainly we only see them as instrumentalist or functionalist, right? They just do the work, but this is a work. But with robots, that distinction is difficult to achieve. So the instrumentality and integration, that distinction cannot be made, and I will show you how. So in this case, it is a framing robot. Our colleagues at ETH Zurich work with very large-scale architectural structure, and it's a roofing structure truss system, a very intricate truss system that was made with a framing robot. This kind of making has only been made possible because of these agencies. The next one, in this case, this is an industrial robot that can actually follow visual cues. So you can actually draw, and the robot begins to follow and do things based on visual cues, which is a different way of interacting with robots than programming them, pre-programming them, or working with remote control. So these are an interesting, again, offers interesting ways of interaction. So in this instance, it's a robotic band sawing, and with this, basically to the industrial articulated arm robot, you could attach a number of end effectors. In this case, a bandsaw is an end effector. And with that, you could do some very interesting things, as you notice here. You can cut precisely along a certain grain, or do operations that are not possible any other way. In this case, it is a familiar scene for those who know robotics, with a hot wire cutter and using foam, blocks of foam. But actually, you can do some very interesting things. So my colleagues across the river have done things like this. Brandon Clifford and my colleague Wes McGee in Michigan, they have done these extraordinary possibilities, architectural possibilities, using just foam. And there is a different aspect here. Unlike traditional shell-based printing processes, this particular additive fabrication process, which means you're adding material, and like 3D printing, this is developed by Joris Laarman and MX3D in Netherlands. And what they do is, this is a project called Dragon Bench. They use direct printing of structural materials, metallic materials, in space, utilizing this articulated arm robot. And there is a custom fabricated metal deposition end effector that you see there. And this method employs all 6 degrees of freedom afforded by the robot, which you cannot do with any other CNC or any other machine. Of course, CNC is subtracted, but any other additive machine fabrication process. And so this is a very unique way that can be done. And so it would not be possible with a scaffold-less 3D printing. So what you see now is that result. This is a Dragon Bench, and achieving these kinds of possibilities are opened up with robotics. And in the next example, you'll see the bridge where Laarman and MX3D, they coupled robotics with advanced manufacturing technologies, and they build the butterflies out of molten metal, and in this case, innovative bridge building that takes a leap into a new space of what I would call robotic autopoiesis, where it is making itself, it is building itself, and it is building really on site and in ways that is not possible any other way. Going a little north in Europe to Denmark, Paul Nicholas, and from Denmark's Center for IT and Architecture, has developed what he calls moldless incremental sheet forming method. So in this case, there are 2 robots that work in tandem to carefully work with sheet metal in real time with real material and with real sensing. So as actually you can see the little red dot that begins to sense what is where, and also the feedback from the process is achieved also in real time. So it is able to achieve that kind of a deformation through a very sophisticated process. And this method obviates the need for molds and dies, and intelligently and interactively works with actual materials to deform and actually achieve structural characteristics. Like this one, the results are structures of exquisite surface deformations and spatially intriguing possibilities. So there is an example of what Paul calls a bridge too far. The geometry in the deformed sheet metal provides structural stability to transfer tensile, compressive, and shear forces without additional framing. And these robotic production methods are important in working with particularly what we can call anisotropic materials that have inherent variability of material characteristics. And continuing that theme, this project is called Woodchip Barn in England, done by students and faculty at Architectural Association London, in a forest in southwest England. The team went to the forest and they built this structure out of 25 uniquely forked trees that were harvested. But first, what they did was to document 204 trees chosen to fit the design criteria, and each member was 3D scanned, and the final structure was designed and fabricated in situ. And the result is quite fascinating. So these are not just new aesthetic possibilities, not just new structural possibilities, but it is a new way of inhabiting the world and being more intelligent about what we do and how we accomplish those in more sustainable ways as well. So the next example I'm going to talk about is a collaboration between architects Gramazio and Kohler and engineer Raffaello Di Andrea in Switzerland. And they explored assembling architectural structures using quadcopter robotic drones, which are not strictly a swarm, but it's a coordinated process. Using a multitude of drones, they assembled 1,500 foam modules to form an architectural installation. Let's watch the video. So the next project I wanted to show you is from the Institute for Computational Design in Stuttgart, and in collaboration with others, they have been developing carbon fiber structures through robotic weaving and to produce lightest possible structures we know. So the results are something like that. Now moving to large-scale construction. In the case of in situ construction, very large scale, researchers in Portugal and elsewhere have been exploring construction robotics that could open up new and more sustainable ways of building using spider bots, what they call spider bots here. These are cable-stayed robots that offer different kinds of possibilities than with traditional construction equipment and cranes and such. Architect Mike Silver has been developing prototypes of robotic masons and masons assistants. He calls them servant zombies, and it's one of the chapters in our book. You can take a look. But what it does is that robots, no matter what the shape and form, they evoke emotion. You know, you look at this, and there is a certain empathy that begins to develop between the human and the robot. And it is very hard to call, you take a 3D printer or a flatbed CNC mill, you don't go and call it adorable or threatening. It is, as we I commented at the outset, those are things, those are objects, they're supposed to be functional and they have a place, and that's about that. But with robots, that is not the case. The form of a machine is an important attribute, and that is a key to understanding robots and robotics in architecture, which is a different approach, a phenomenological approach, and a relational approach to robotics than what we used to do in digital fabrication or other kinds of paradigms before robotics. Let me offer a different framework, because we're talking about architectural scale possibilities, and how can robotics become, how can buildings become robotics, or how can robots become part of the architectural landscape, the built environment? So either buildings can have robotic components, they could have robotic systems, they could have robotic structures, or robotic space. And I'll show you a few examples to illustrate these things. Now, robotic components and systems I've already talked about, and I'll show you robotic space and structures examples now. So this case, it is North Carolina State University Hunt Library. The next slide, there we go. So this is the NCSU Hunt Library. It's called a BookBot, and it's an example of a building scale robot where the entire space is robotic. And if you see that red circle, in the red circle, you can see the human being. And that is the scale of this robot. It is a gigantic multi-story robot that does a lot of things in this library. And there are now many libraries like this, robotic libraries. So in this case, the buildings, entire buildings have become robotic. In this example, my colleague Axel Killian has designed and installed what he called flexing room at the Seoul Biennale of Architecture and Urbanism. In this case, it is a structure that can flex, move, and respond in intelligent ways. So this is what I call how we flex together. are how we dwell together, and architect Philip Beasley's trademark robotic environments with their finely detailed feathers, arms, and exquisite limbs and articulated limbs and behaviors, and creates what he calls primitive life forms that interact with human dwellers. And it is essential that robots that everything they do is an interaction with the world around them, right? That is one of the aspects, key aspects of it. And they interact with us, and they interact with each other. They also interact with their environments, as I talked about a little while ago. So robotics in an architectural context could be really understood this way through interactions. In the case of wearable robotic architecture, architect Behnaz Farahi designed these incredibly exquisite, intricate, and evocative statements on robotic mediation of human dynamics in a gendered space. As you can see, the robotic agencies at the body scale and in ways that become part of being human as well. The next example, pair of patients can walk again using experience robotic. So this was in preparation for soccer World Cup. And so now moving to another realm, if we think religious arena is immune to robotics, think again. This is robotic priest, bless you too. It was unveiled in Germany to mark 500 years since Reformation. So in this case, the priest can deliver blessings in 5 languages and with blinking lights in hands to go with it as well. Now, this was done as an experiment. But that was not the first robot to make forays into religious business. The credit actually goes to Xian robot monk, who could chant mantras and explain the basic tenets of Buddhism. And what I'm trying to convey here is that these are relationship bound. These are based on interactions, and these are based on certain attachments we develop for robots. And in a touching and heartwarming example of how robots connect with humans, here there were 62 dead Aibo robot dogs. Those dogs were given a traditional funeral in a Buddhist temple in Tokyo, and that left their owners in tears. And that is a kind of bond and attachment that people develop, and empathy. Now, these are, of course, the 3 rules, the 3 famous rules of Isaac Asimov when he first wrote about the 3 laws of robotics. Significant ethical issues have been ignited, leading to raging debates in ethics, law, and jurisprudence. So the 3 rules are that a robot may not injure a human being, a robot must obey the orders given to it by human beings, and robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with these other rules. But let us see if those rules hold good anymore. So here it is. We break the rule. The autonomous robotic weapons have already transgressed Asimov's 3 rules, and they hold deadly prospects. So the question for us is roboethics. Roboethics is an emerging field. And the question I ask is, what are the rules for humans about how we treat robots? And this is a question being asked by many roboethicists. Robots, by virtue of their form and agency, they place themselves more in the realm of living beings from a phenomenological perspective. Even when we know robots are not alive, we cannot help but attribute qualities of life to them, impart the qualities to them. And by doing so, we embrace robots as a part of the continuum of life, and hence the necessary debates about ethics, morality, and legality. So how robots are, what robots do, how robots affect humans, and how humans treat robots, and what social status we accord robots, these are all aspects of ethical considerations. And these considerations also raise significant issues of social discourses of architecture about the place of robots in this world. So let me conclude with this thought. The rise of robots has been described as the fourth industrial revolution, at a time when problems of global scale, such as climate change, pandemics that we're living through currently, inequality, oppression, access to education or lack thereof, extremism, which are all created by the paradigms of the past. And we cannot look to our past for solutions. We cannot solve the problems by the paradigms that created them, as a famous saying goes, but that new paradigms have to be looked to in order to solve the problems from the past. So look to the future. And how will we work together with the robots toward a more empathetic and humbler world? So ultimately, robots are about being human and help reveal aspects of ourselves and our relationships that few other technologies before it could do so effectively. Thank you. And just to remind all of you, the AIA CEUs, if you would like to obtain them, please do email beverlyverla@thebac.edu. And I also want to recognize the assistance provided by David Hansen, my IT colleague at the BAC, to make this all a very smooth and enjoyable experience. And my kids helped me set this up as well. So I have had a great time getting up for this, trying this new format. And thank you, Karen, for really making this possible and inviting me, and through the Boston Design Week, who have incorporated this into their series of virtual activities, and to the AIA chapters, many places, and schools of architecture and design in the region who might be carrying this live. So thank you all, and I'm open to questions and answers. And David will assist me by reading some of these questions, and we can have a conversation.
All right, there's no questions yet, but there should be, if you hover over the bottom of your screen in the Zoom session, an option to ask questions in a Q&A field. So we're going to take those type.
Yeah, so Karen has a question about roboethics and what is the basis of this whole thing. I think it is about, I'll give an example. In one particular case, an experiment, so some conference attendees, they participated in this experiment, and they were given some robots to play with, and they played with them. And then they were told to destroy the robots. And guess what happened? They could not do it. They just couldn't do it. And another example, soldiers who were working with robots, these are like spider bots that would do certain things. And so those were robot masters in Army who were working with these robots. And when in instances where these robots were blown up, and there was a grieving process for these soldiers. And so there is that dimension is what then raises the questions of ethics about how do you treat, just as there are animal rights and animal issues of how we treat animal kind. And these are the kind of issues that are coming up with robots as well. And just to be sure, this is a debate that is been raging on, and to be seen what happens in that area. Next question.
Mahesh, Judy Nish is asking, what projects in the Boston area are using robotics?
If you are referring to any architectural projects and things like that, so I would point to a couple of examples. So my colleagues at MIT, and they are working on robotic houses. Those are experimental and still haven't necessarily been in the production or market stage. That's one example, and House N is one example at MIT. And Autodesk has what is known as build space. And in that case, they have opened up the facility to artists, architects, designers, and engineers to come collaborate, work, have a fellowship there, and do a number of things. So there are a number of projects going on through that platform as well. But if you're talking about very large scale works that may have incorporated or working with these, I'm not aware of any.
All right, BAC student Methuselah says, thank you so much for the lecture. And do you think robots might grow a conscience?
A consciousness?
Yes.
Consciousness, yeah. So in our book, I write about consciousness, right? Without really getting into the philosophical dilemmas of consciousness, let me just articulate it this way, in ways that we can wrap our mind around it, no pun intended, is first, we haven't fully understood what actually consciousness means and or how we are conscious. That is still a matter of investigation, a matter of understanding. Certainly we experience, we know, but we cannot quite describe in biological terms how consciousness arises. Is it and the best we can say, it is an emergent phenomena. So in the case of biological beings, consciousness is still to be understood. So it would be presumptive of us to say we are conscious, those are not, because we cannot quite tell if robots are or not conscious, because we cannot quite describe what consciousness is. So there is a dilemma there. Now, in the case of robots and artificial intelligence, they can, what is known as a narrow artificial intelligence, narrow AI. There are certain areas where the robots can approach the level of consciousness that is displayed or demonstrated by living beings. But in the case of general artificial intelligence, which we are very good at, in other words, we are aware of a number of things, we have a context within a context within a context, we can work through those contexts. That is a general artificial intelligence where we can work on a number of different kinds of problems or tasks and activities and fluidly between things. That technologically has not been achieved and probably cannot be achieved for a long time to come, and different experts have given different understandings of it or estimates of it. Some say 2035, some say another 100 years, but it is to be seen. But I think what I'm trying to say here is not in absolutist terms, or, but rather in existentialist or phenomenological terms. When something or some machine is exhibiting behaviors, right? Even in our case, we can only see the behaviors of other living beings. We cannot get inside their mind to see it and experience it through their perspectives. But we can imagine it, we can empathize with that. But the perspective is still ours. So in that sense, the best we can say is other living beings must be conscious is a deduction that we make. Same thing applies to robots as well. Robots display extraordinarily intelligent behaviors. And even, for example, a vacuum cleaner. If you look at vacuum cleaners and how they interact with cats and dogs, you will see the point. Cats and dogs cannot quite tell if the vacuum cleaner is an animal are not an animal because the behaviors are like living beings. So that is the extent of understanding them as phenomena that are presented to us in this world, and we interact with them. And we interact with them on those terms. Take another example like Alexa. Alexa is an artificial intelligence, and but we talk to Alexa like we talk to other human beings. Then there are people doing that as well. So, and that is why phenomenological approach is quite intriguing and very important.
All right. Next question is from Chris, who's asking, how would you adapt these theories and possibilities to the architectural pedagogy at the BAC?
Very good question indeed. So there is some literature on pedagogy based on robotics. In fact, I have co-authored some papers on that as well. And so there is an understanding of how do you do that. And robotics, as I showed, there is a range of things we can do, right? From humanoid or anthropoid or zooid robots of different scales, small objects to big things, or mechanomorphic robots like industrial robots, or drones. These are all robot kinds. So it depends on what form of robotics we take up. And certainly I have experimented with a range of those, and I have some idea of that. But I think it is a question of, still a question of experimentation and being open to the possibilities and to learn. I think that is the mode we are still in. So it is a budding field. And what I hope we can do at the BAC is to open up and create a space for considering these questions from not just technological perspectives of making. I think that is one small aspect of it, but rather how could we look at the range of robotics as phenomena and be able to see how that transforms who we are or how we look at ourselves. You know, as Rodney Brooks said, we begin to define ourselves as we are robots, or we look at robots and say they are living beings. And so the paradigm shift. So the pedagogy will have to follow these kinds of lines of question and inquiry, but from a design perspective. Right? If we understand design as a way of really thinking about the living beings and how we can create environments or create objects and products and experiences around those understandings, then we can take that into this realm too. And that is why I pose a question in my title as how will we blank together? And that is still a question, right? And that is an open-ended question, and we'll have to consider that. So the one thing I can do is to do what I'm doing right now is to share some thoughts, and hopefully that will begin to reveal some possibilities and explorations by various colleagues.
Andrew asks if you could speak more about the robotics at the building scale, architectronic level, not so much robot fabrication, but the building as a robot.
Yeah, building as a robot is an interesting niche area. And if you actually look back in architectural history or actually history of built environment as a whole, if you look at drawbridges or large-scale machines, those are all kinetic, right? We used to call them kinetic architecture. And then we started calling them responsive or interactive architectures. And now we really understand them as robotic architectures if they have intelligent agency. So in that sense, there is already a lot of work around us that is potentially physical, kinetic, and can be intelligent. So that is one category. The other category are examples that I had shown where there are active robotic agencies and actually designed around those. Those are limited possibilities, partly because the paradigm around which the built environment is built and developed it doesn't lend itself directly to moving stuff. And there have been certainly ideas, speculations, experiments. To what extent they take hold in the society, that is to be seen. And there are many examples in that particular category. There is one more category inherent in your question. You talk about construction as well. So currently I sit on the board of editorial board of Construction Robotics Journal, where we're beginning to see what are the emerging trends in construction, in the building construction or landscape construction or large scale construction in general. What is the role of robotics from a variety of areas? For instance, how do you actually understand using drones to be able to document the conditions and or ascertain conditions, or to be able to use robotic earth moving equipment? All of these are things that are emerging, and I think probably they are another 5 to 10 years out in terms of seeing them widespread, but they're already in effect. So there are different aspects that are in development. To what extent they take hold is to be seen.
All right. Don Hunsiger asks if you will give us a robotic ethical dilemma, perhaps exclusive of robotic weapons. Yeah,
so interestingly, this debate, this particular topic, is of tremendous interest in the disciplines of in the jurisprudence and in obviously robotic ethics and in international relationships and a variety of other areas. So there's a lot of literature on that actually already. And there's a lot of pretty heated debates going on about the role of robotic weapons in the world. And they're highly controversial. There's no doubt about it. In fact, in Europe, a number of scholars have signed major resolutions, and the European Union has some record of passing some resolutions against robotic weapons and their use. But we know that they are being actively pursued around the world. But that is certainly something that scholars have commented quite a bit about.
Felice asks, is there a role for robots in today's design offices in the design process?
Absolutely. And I intentionally focused in this talk on robotics, not artificial intelligence. And so the distinction, as I said, is robots are fundamentally embodied intelligence. They're physical and they're kinetic. So they are in the world in a physical existence, and they sense, they think about, and they act in ways to change the environment. So that is the scope of robotics. But if you're talking about artificial intelligence, there are another set of possibilities that are opened up. And if you're talking about design process, in the process of ideating, considering options, understanding context, producing a number of alternatives, there are already a number of developments taking place where they can actually understand the context demonstrably better than some designers can, because they're able to see certain hidden aspects and or be able to be much more aware of the biases. And certainly artificial intelligence, one controversial topic about AI is the biases within AI. But at the same time, if we address those, AI can check our biases in the design processes as well. So that has an impact. The ability to generate options has an impact. The ability to, for example, let us say, given a set of considerations, what kinds of three-dimensional formal possibilities can be generated? For a human, it takes a number of, definitely some time, a number of iterations, and the AI can be a partner in that process, and so they're having some experiments done in that regard. So I would say in the next 5 years, that is probably one area of potential transformation and may even challenge how jobs what are the future jobs in the architecture, engineering, design, construction industries. That is a very interesting thing to watch.
Nancy asks, do you see a possibility of robots assisting our healthcare workers somehow in the current crisis?
Absolutely, and I have showed one example. If you go back to the robot that disinfects, that sanitizes, and in fact, there have been other cases where industrial robots, those are called actually co-robots, where they collaborate. And these are robots that can actually exist within the same space as humans. If you take industrial robots, traditionally, they have to be in their own space because they're very dangerous and they don't sense who else is in the environment. They just do the task. But in co-robotics, you can collaboratively see, and in soft robotics in particular, you can occupy a space. So in a healthcare setting, there are already quite a few advances in accomplishing those. Then there are humanoid robots and social robots, and in some cases, caring robots, where they can take medicines and be able to perform a certain role where humans would otherwise do and be in the line of danger. So there are many possibilities in all of these aspects. And I'm not even talking about surgical robots. So yes, I think there are many possibilities in assistive care settings, in healthcare settings, and as well as in other contexts.
Rich asks if you could speak to the potential intersections between the future of robotics and the future of the BAC.
I would say probably bright. And I hope, certainly hope, that as I share these thoughts and ideas, and I only hope that a discourse can develop and emerge out of these conversations. As Karen rightly pointed out at the outset, that the BAC is a place of conversation, has always been a place of conversation, place of innovation, a place of open consideration of the future possibilities. So within that space, I certainly hope this can be a topic that we could take up. And it could be as part of course class considerations, subject area considerations, or special events or exhibitions, or it can take many forms and shapes. But I certainly hope I could contribute something and certainly create the possibility of conversation.
Excellent. So this question is from Marjan. I hope I pronounced that correctly. There is a certain level of fear when it comes to how far robots will become involved in our lives. Yeah. I think it's more because of the fear that robots might replace us. Yeah. What's your thoughts on this, and how do you think architects should prepare themselves so that they don't become in competition with architects?
Yeah.
I mean,
so absolutely, good question. I have lost count of how many movies and works of literature there are about the destructive things that robots can do or artificial intelligence could do, right? So there are countless possibilities, including 2001: Space Odyssey. So those fears are there. And I think rightly so, we have to be careful about being aware and preventing those futures from emerging. And like with any technology, it is an important consideration to say, how do we shape them? And in that regard, fear usually comes from the unknown and the uncertain. So when there is fear, there is the unknown and the uncertain, or it comes from the past where somebody was hurt, had a bad experience with robots or robotic topic areas and develops a fear about it. And so it comes from either the past or the future in the form of the unknown and the uncertain. And that is where I think knowing and actually actively shaping these technological possibilities is an important thing that we have to do. Then we can shape and minimize the harm that could potentially be done and maximize the kinds of benefits in how we will underscore together. So whatever verb that we fill in that blank we can do that. But if it is a destructive purpose, then that is the direction that it takes. So we have to, it is ultimately about us and about our society and about our civilization and culture. And our values, certainly.
Jim asks, as robots become more anthropomorphic, is there a concern that how we choose to treat them may impact how we also treat each other?
Absolutely. That's a great question, Jim. And that is exactly what I have pointed out is because of the form, we accord certain relationship, certain attributes and certain qualities and certain status. And again, the literature and films have explored this to a great extent, but the form is very important. And the humanoid form is utterly important in that case. So that is why when these robots take on the humanoid form, even if their kinetic and their intelligence is limited, they still have a special status than something that may not look like a human being or an animal, but is more intelligent.
So Bruce asks, without consciousness or conscience, is there agency?
A great question. Without consciousness or conscience, is there agency? The answer is, if we look at the broad understanding of what is agency, yes, it is possible. In fact, that is a whole debate about are these conscious or not conscious, are they living, non-living? All of that comes from that question of agency and consciousness. What robots show us is that agency is possible without what we know and experience as consciousness and conscience. And the space between those two is very interesting. And that is the potential exploration that we need to do about agency is possible without those attributes, but to what end? And how do we incorporate that into our social, political, and cultural frameworks?
So the next one I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. And Shagun asks, as humans, we're pretty bad at treating the world correctly. Do you think in dealing with robotics that it could end up having negative impacts for us, the creators, that we won't be able to handle?
Absolutely. It's always possible. If you say, is it possible? The answer is yes. The question is it probable? The answer is maybe. And is it likely? I think it will entirely depend on us as to how we shape it, how we shape the societal discourses about these things. And that is why having these conversations is very important.
So Mark asks, Ray Kurzweil refers to the singularity as the point which computer processing power reaches the same levels as human brain processing capabilities. What are your thoughts on this relative to robots and AI?
Yeah, I think not much, quite frankly. I think what is described as singularity is where Ray Kurzweil talks about computational intelligence approaching natural intelligence, and that artificial general intelligence could be achieved, but it is a speculation at this point of time. It's almost like this. We are saying it is going to become something, but right now we don't even know what that something is currently to describe. So how can we predict something when we ourselves don't know what it is that we're talking about, right? So that is one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is, who imagined the COVID-19 phenomenon would happen? I mean, of course, there are people who imagined it, but largely the world did not see that, while some thinkers and seers, scientists, have pointed it out. And so when things happen, they may happen in surprising ways, the black swan, that is why, in surprising ways, and that is how usually they may present themselves. So singularity, maybe it will happen, but by then, what is the status of our society? What are the kind of values that our world chooses to embrace? Will we learn anything from these experiences, like the COVID-19 experience, and try to be wiser about it and develop more calmer, reflective, empathetic, lighter approach to living. Those are the questions that will answer what happens with it when we do, if we do achieve that level of artificial intelligence. So to what end will that be utilized?
Okay, the next question is from Beth, and I really like this question just because my past work myself. But she says, thank you, President Daas. And she'd like you to speak to the digital divide and how robotics might influence this social justice issue. Pardon.
Great question, Beth. I think it's probably one of the most important questions. Is part of the problem in technological development and innovation is that usually access to technologies and innovations is limited to the haves. But when it comes to have-nots, they either do not play a role or shape the development of those innovations and technologies. And that is why having access is utterly important. And that is one reason why in our vision elements, we talked about having access to the cutting edge technology is important because we can shape it. It is a social justice issue. And it is important that we take these discourses and technologies in an inclusive way, in ways that can incorporate. For instance, already there is a healthy amount of debate and a very important line of debate about the biases that are built into artificial intelligence and robotics that need to be challenged. And they are not challenged because certain people are not at the table. And so either they need to be brought to the table or the table needs to be taken to them in order to incorporate. But that this is an important transformative topic area that requires participation in an inclusive manner.
All right, thank you very much. There's still a couple questions outstanding, but we've run out of time.
Yep,
So
I think, yeah, let's take maybe one more question and that will wrap this up.
Okay, let me try to find a great one. A lot of these are touching on very similar issues. I guess this one is actually from Anonymous. And do you think there's a point where robotics will decrease the value of an architect, drafter, PA, PM, partner, or decrease the value they can provide?
Yes and no. And yes, in the sense of what we currently understand as what we do. No, in the sense that as things evolve, as the roles evolve, and as how we define architects and designers and their role, their skill sets change, then they begin to evolve and open up new possibilities. Just as the role of architect, let's say you go back 130 years to the founding days of the Boston Architectural Club, was very different. And if they were asking the same question at that time, envisioning the computational technologies, the construction technologies, and all of that, they would have had a similar question, but could not have envisioned how it has transformed our professions and our disciplines and our knowledge areas. So I only hope that through these discourses, we can envision a richer, wiser, more resilient world in which we play a role that is relevant to the times. So in that sense, no, I think there is always going to be a possibility to redefine, evolve, and change toward a better world. So with that, I think we will conclude. Again, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you for having me and giving me this opportunity to carve out this space in such an extraordinary time. So have a wonderful evening, and please reach out to me if you have any other questions. Thank you.